Hello everyone and welcome back to Xert Academy. This is Scott here from the Xert team, and I'm excited to continue along with part 2 of our 3-part series called Mastering Xert. Now the goal of this video series is to help Xerters develop a greater understanding of the concepts behind the platform, as well as show you many of the features that are available within Xert. My personal goal for this video series is to help you get the most out of your training with Xert. In the first part of this video series, we talked about how you can use Xert to discover your fitness. And if you haven't seen that lesson yet, I recommend stopping here and continuing after you've seen that first video. Some of the concepts that I explain in the Discover video are revisited in today's content. Now, in today's video, we're going to talk about how we can use Xert to help you improve. What I want you to understand is that training and improvement is a very large topic, and today's video isn't meant to be a comprehensive video explaining every training strategy that's out there. Instead, I want to focus on some of the key concepts that Xert uses and some of the key features that are available in the Xert software to help you improve. So in the first section of today's video, I'm going to spend some time explaining how Xert quantifies your training. Since improvement is relative to where you are right now, it's important that Xert understands your current state and your current level of fitness. In the second part of today's video, we'll focus specifically on how Xert helps you improve and some of the concepts that Xert uses to help you improve. And in the last part of today's video, I'll spend some time talking specifically about adaptive training, the fitness planner, the training pacer, and also your role in adaptive training, because that's an important part of improving as well. We've got a lot of ground to cover for today, so let's jump into the content right away. As I mentioned in the introduction, in order for us to help you improve, it's important that we have a good understanding of your current state of fitness. Quantifying your training is a topic that we've discussed previously in our Xert podcast series, but I think it'll be beneficial to revisit some of these topics along with the visual demonstrations that I've put together. And so in this section, I'll be talking about the Xert strain score metric. You'll often see it abbreviated in the software as XSS. Secondly, I'll have a discussion on Xert's focus metric, and we'll wrap up this section by talking about training status. To get started, we'll talk about Xert strain score, or XSS. And to put it simply, it's a number that quantifies how much strain was placed on your body during an activity or during a workout. And it's important to understand that this number is relative to your own fitness signature. And it's normalized so that for every athlete, regardless of their fitness signature, an hour of endurance paced riding for them will be somewhere around 60 to 80 XSS. An hour of riding right at or just below your threshold will yield you about 100 XSS. And lastly, an hour of very intense riding, so whether that's a crit or a Zwift race or a hard group ride or a hard workout, you might find that that yields over 100 XSS in a single hour. So you might be wondering, how is this number calculated, or how does Xert figure out how much XSS I get from an activity? Well, it's based on two factors. First of all, Xert is looking at how much power you're producing every single second. And so if you produce more power, you're going to get more XSS. So for example, if I were to pedal for 150 watts for an hour and compare that to 100 watts for an hour, I'm going to get more XSS by riding at 150 watts. Why? Because I'm doing more work. I'm putting more strain on my body. The second important factor that you want to keep in mind, or that Xert uses when calculating XSS, is how fatigued you are. And so Xert is also looking second by second as you're producing power. So as you're pedaling, Xert is looking at your maximum power available. And what you'll notice as you start using the software more and more is that you get rewarded more for efforts that you do under fatigue, or efforts where your MPA is lowered. And this makes sense. This explains why we do intervals. You get more credit for doing work under fatigue. And to help you understand this, I've put together a couple demonstrations. So let's hop into the Xert software. For the first demonstration of the day, I'm going to revisit the 20-minute FTP test that we looked at in the first video of this series. I really like this activity because it very easily illustrates many of the key concepts behind the Xert platform. And in this demonstration, we're going to use it to validate that, first of all, writing at a higher intensity generates more XSS, and secondly, that your MPA also factors into how much XSS you're awarded during an activity. I'll first point out that you can find the strain score for a particular activity in the bottom left corner of the MPA software analytics. And if you remember from our first video, these numbers will be recalculated over various selections of the activity. And so what I'm going to do first is compare the first 5 minutes of the activity, where I'm just hopping on the bike and warming up, to the 5-minute high-intensity warm-up before the 20-minute effort. So if I click and drag over my 5-minute segment here, you'll see that the numbers update, and you can see that my average power for the segment was quite low. Obviously, I was just warming up, and so I was awarded 3 XSS from that first 5 minutes of pedaling. If I were to click and drag this over the 5-minute high-intensity warm-up before that 20-minute effort, you'll see that obviously the average power is quite a bit higher, and as a result, I'm awarded more XSS. So we can see that, in fact, riding at a higher intensity does award you more XSS than riding at a lower intensity. But what is the role of MPA? And to help illustrate the role that MPA plays in this, I want you to look at this 20-minute effort. You'll see that by and large, it's fairly evenly paced. There's a couple of segments where I go above or below, but I didn't blow up halfway through and I didn't sprint and surge at the end. It was fairly evenly paced. So what you might think initially is that the amount of strain that you accumulate in the first 5 minutes would be equal to the last 5 minutes. But we're going to take a look and actually investigate this. So if we look at, say, the first 5 minutes of this activity, that's about 5 minutes, you can see the average power was 324 watts, and I generated 9 XSS. You'll also see at the top of the page that my MPA barely came down. It was pretty close to my peak power for this first 5 minutes. But if I click and drag this towards the middle 5 minutes of the activity, you'll see that the average power is roughly the same, but I get more XSS than I did in the first 5 minutes. And if you look closely at MPA, it's starting to work its way lower and lower. And in fact, if I click and drag this towards, say, the last 5 minutes of the activity, you'll see that my average power is actually lowest in this 5-minute segment, but I generate the most XSS from this 5-minute segment. Why? Because MPA was so low. Xert recognized that I was suffering by this point. My legs were very tired, and so Xert gave me more credit. It gave me more XSS for this 5 minutes than it did for the first 5 minutes when I was relatively fresh. So hopefully this demonstration illustrates that XSS is based on how hard you're riding as well as your MPA. In the next demonstration, I'm going to show you that the order in which you do work in Xert also matters, and it's because of your MPA. So let's jump over to the second demonstration. In this second demonstration, I want to show you the importance of order and why order matters in Xert. To do this, I'm going to take us into the Workout Designer, and we're going to look at 2 workouts. I have example workout A displayed here on the screen, and example workout B now displayed on the screen. The main difference between, or the only difference between these 2 workouts is the order in which the 2 steps of the main set are completed. In example workout B here, you'll see that the orange interval, which is a 3-minute interval at 120% of threshold, is completed after the green interval, which consists of 2 minutes at 95% of threshold power. Looking at example workout A, the order is flipped. The hard interval is done first, followed by the easier interval. Now, these 2 workouts have the exact same average power If you were to analyze them in another system, they would have the same time in zones. The total work between these two workouts is exactly the same. I haven't adjusted the percentages or anything, but what I want you to notice now is that example workout A shows that it is calculated for 108 XSS, and example workout B is calculated for 95 XSS. Well, why is there a difference? Other systems can't account for this because they don't account for MPA. So what you'll see in this activity, or in this workout, workout B, you'll see that the green interval is done when MPA has fully recovered, and that the only interval done under fatigue is that orange interval. If I flip us back to example workout A, which had more XSS, you can now see that doing the orange interval first generates fatigue, it draws down MPA, and that the green interval is done when you're already under fatigue. And so Xert is awarding you extra XSS in this case because you're performing that green interval under fatigue. And so hopefully this example helps illustrate why not only average power matters, or why Xert doesn't use average power or time in zones. Instead, Xert is looking every second at how much power you're producing, and it's looking at your MPA, because both of those are important when we want to calculate XSS. Hopefully this makes sense. Let's jump back to the presentation. Now that you have a basic understanding of Xert strain score, I want to transition this talk into one about Xert's focus metric. I'll start off by saying that focus is perhaps the most innovative yet abstract concept that's come out of the Xert platform so far. To get started on this section, I'll start off with a simple example. I want you to think about 3 separate runners. One is a 100-meter sprinter, one is a 1600 meter or mile runner, and the third one is a marathoner. The demands for a 100-meter sprinter are going to be quite different than the demands for a middle distance runner. And the demands for both of those athletes will still be different than the demands for a marathon runner. And so in a similar way, Xert's focus metric helps us start to understand what the demands are for particular athletes and particular athlete types. Reconnecting to XSS, in the previous section, we mentioned that XSS tells us how much training or how much strain you've put on your body, but that strain is actually subdivided into your 3 energy systems, which, as you might guess, include your threshold power system, your high intensity energy system, and your peak power system. The focus metric itself helps us understand which of those 3 systems are affected by your workouts and by your activities. So to help you further understand this concept, I'm going to walk you through a couple of different examples. We'll take a look at the MPA and the power data, and look at the resulting athlete type, or focus type. The first example I have here is an endurance ride. And as you can see from the MPA chart here, you can see that the endurance ride consists of a lot of blue and green riding, a little bit of teal, but there's no sprinting, there's no 5-minute hard all-out efforts in this activity. It's very low intensity, and so the resulting XSS from this activity is all going to be low intensity XSS. And as I grab my laser pointer here, we didn't see any sprinting, there's no high intensity efforts involved, and so the resulting focus type of this endurance ride is endurance focus. Now this is in stark contrast to, say, a Zwift crit race, where you can see from the MPA data here and the power data, you can see there's hard surges, there's a powerful sprint at the end, so that the surges could be trying to hold a wheel, it could be trying to bridge a gap, punching to stick with a group up a short hill. There's many reasons why you might need to surge like that. And all of those surging efforts and the sprint effort at the end, you're now starting to put XSS on your HIE and your peak power systems. So now this isn't going to be an endurance focus ride because we're also straining your sprinting and your HIE systems. So we might expect to see a focus type of pursuiter for this activity because there's sprinting, because there's hard efforts. Now the third activity we'll take a look at is a group ride. And you'll see I call this ride a bit of a mixed bag. You'll see there's quite a bit of endurance at the start of this activity. There's a couple hard efforts where MPA comes down. You'll see there's a couple of peak power sprints. They could be town sign sprints. And so this ride is going to have a bit of everything in it. And the focus type for this activity is going to be somewhere in the middle of all of that. Say Breakaway Specialist or your 5-minute power. Lastly, we have a Breakaway Specialist workout. You can see the description or the overview of the workout here. Lots of intervals that are very close to that 5-minute power. And so as you might guess, the focus type of this workout is also going to be Breakaway Specialist. In the next couple of slides, I really want to get you to that aha or I get it moment for focus. And to do this, I'm going to take us to a bar chart, which is now going to show the percentage breakdown for those 4 activities that we just took a look at. And we'll start with the endurance activity. Unsurprisingly, the endurance activity, which had no sprints or hard efforts, is almost 100% low XSS. And so the resulting focus type was a very long focus duration, endurance focus. And this was in very stark contrast to the Zwift race, which had a lot of hard efforts, bridging gaps, holding wheels, a powerful finishing sprint at the end. So you'll see much more of a contribution from the high and the peak intensity systems. And so the resulting focus type is a much shorter focus type. For the group ride, which was a bit of a mixed bag, there was some endurance, some harder efforts, and some sprints in there, as well as the Breakaway Specialist workout, which had a lot of structured intervals at the athlete's 5-minute power. Both of those activities had a Breakaway Specialist athlete type. And one comment that I want to make here is look at the similarity in the distribution of XSS between these two activities. You could analyze this and you would interpret this as saying that that group ride, which was unstructured, it was social, has the same strain benefit as a dedicated Breakaway Specialist workout. And what you might start to find as you use Xert more and more is that many of your unstructured rides, whether they're group rides, whether they're Zwift races, are just as good training for you as heading off by yourself to go and grind some intervals. So that's just something that I want to point out, and it does show some of the usefulness behind the focus metric. To really bring home the point and recap the idea behind focus, I'm going to display the various focus types and then start to show you the approximate distribution for XSS for each focus type. Starting with endurance, unsurprisingly, like we saw in the previous slide, you'll see the overwhelming majority of your XSS in an endurance type ride is going to be low XSS. Now, as you start adding in some intensity, so as you see the yellow portion of the activity increase, when you start to strain your high intensity system more, the focus duration starts to drop. So now, instead of an endurance focus here, now you're at a GC specialist, which is about your 8-minute power. As you continue to add high intensity and a little bit of peak intensity, the focus continues to drop. So to the point that we get to your 5-minute power, you'll now see more contribution from your high intensity system and some contribution from your peak power system. And this continues as we go lower and lower to now your 3-minute focus, your pursuiter focus. You'll see a lot of contribution from your high and your peak intensity systems, all the way to our sprinting systems, your 2-minute power and your 10-second power. You can see now that the peak power or your peak energy system is strained much more during these sprinter focus activities. And so to really wrap things up, Xert's focus metric is looking at the strain applied across your three systems, and it's giving us some information about which of your energy systems were being strained during a particular activity or workout. So hopefully this makes some sense for you. Let's continue on with the last content for this section. I'll wrap up this first section of today's Mastering Xert video by talking about training status. In Xert, your training status is a quick and easy way for us to visualize how much training you typically do, as well as the type of training that you are ready for. You'll notice your training status is displayed as the number of stars in your profile, as well as the color of those stars. You can find that either at the header of the Xert webpage or from your Xert EBC app for Android or for iOS. I'll first direct your attention to the number of stars. The number of stars reflects how much training you typically do on average, and so you'll go from a 0-star rating, which we would consider untrained, up to a 5-star or a pro level rating. Note that a 5-star rating, if you have a 5-star rating, that doesn't mean that you should be in the pro peloton. It simply reflects that you train quite a lot. To help you understand how much training you would need to do to reach various star levels, I've displayed that information quickly on the right here. So, for example, to reach your first star, you'll need to, on average, ride about 25 XSS per day. To reach the second star, 50 XSS per day. For the third star, 75 XSS per day. For the fourth star, 110 XSS per day. And for that fifth and final star, you're looking at averaging 150 XSS per day, which is quite a bit of riding. That's why we would consider it a pro level rating. For the second part of your training status, we're looking at the color of those stars. The color of those stars relays information about which of your training systems, so your threshold power, your high intensity energy, and your peak power, it relays information about which of those systems are ready to train. And we're actually going to take a deeper look at that in the next section. To wrap up this first section of the Mastering Xert video, I wanted to quickly recap what we've talked about so far. First, we talked about XSS. It's calculated based on your power output as well as your MPA. Secondly, we talked about focus, which looks at how XSS is broken down into your three training systems, your low intensity, high intensity, and peak intensity systems. And it relays information about which of those systems were strained during an activity. And lastly, we talked about training status, which is simply the number of stars in your profile, as well as the color of those stars. Let's continue on with the bulk of today's content.